I'm Florence Dore, and it's time to connect.
Hey, Florence Dore, how are you doing? Thanks for taking the time to connect.
Oh, thank you so much for connecting with me. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. We've struggled a little bit getting our schedules lined up, but thank
Yeah,
you for being patient. We're finally
thank you.
doing this, and thank you, by the way, for playing. I know you did at least one of my live streams last year
Oh,
during the
yes, we
pandemic.
did a Dylan live stream.
That's right. Yeah, and we definitely want to talk about Dylan today. But let's start by talking about the fact that you have a new record, right? You've got a record that
Yes, I
is.
do. Yeah, I mean, so many people who were making records right when the pandemic struck have sad tales, and I do too. I had just returned to music after many years. I have a 16-year-old daughter. It seemed like a good time to get back into it, and we did a tour. My husband is my drummer, Will Rigby, and we did a little tour and recorded the first single, and that was March 8th, 2020.
Wow.
And so there was all this momentum and energy about the project. And so Peter Holsapple and Will were in the DBs, and Peter's in the band, and he had suggested for our live shows the cover Somewhere Down the Line by Marshall Crenshaw. And I wanted to do something a little more rockin', so we didn't do that for the live shows. But when everything closed down, and it's actually hard to put yourself there now, thank goodness, but we were all really scared, I think. And that song felt really soothing to me. Somewhere down the line, it's going to be more than fine. These days will never cross our minds, somewhere down the line. And so we recorded it remotely and safely. And Don Dixon is the producer of my new record, Highways and Rocketships, and he recorded it. He put it together for us, and trying to figure out what to do with it and how to keep what to do with all this energy that we had. I connected with these really wonderful people in Chapel Hill who used to run Mammoth Records, Steve Balcom and Lane Worster, and then entertainment lawyer named Sean Nolan. We created this giant benefit for Cat's Cradle called Cover Charge. So we made a record. My husband's band, the DBs, donated. I'm on an island. So they were all pandemic themed tracks like mine. Mine was a little more serious. So there were joke ones, but also sad ones. The Connells from down here did Keep Your Distance. And Southern Culture on the Skids did Let's Work Together. It was just a really positive, wonderful thing. It took a huge amount of work, and it charted and made a whole bunch of money for the Cradle. So that was awesome. And then as that kind of settled down, it started to look like vaccines could happen, and they did. And so we scheduled it, and we recorded the record last summer. And then, like I said, we did that at Fidelatorium with Don Dixon and Mitch Easter, and got the guys down from New York. I've got Jeremy Chatzky and Mark Spencer on the record, and we did it, and it's ready to roll. And then there's vinyl shortage, so it's finally coming out. I'm really excited about it finally happening. We have a record release party here in Chapel Hill at the Cat's Cradle, appropriately. I became really, close with that venue over the pandemic. And so, yeah, and Mary Huff she sang on my record as a result of Cover Charge. I met all these musicians in the area. Mary sang on one of my songs on the record. And she's going to come and do that for the record release show. And so are the Connells. They're going to come do their Cover Charge song. And so anyway, it's just a joyful kind of finish line moment. Highways and Rocketships, and somehow that name now feels sort of like it's taken on new meaning. We've had to not only drive on highways, but go into, I don't know, outer space to make this thing happen. So
Yeah, that's exciting. It is an interesting time. This last 2 years has been, just crazy, and it still is a little bit of a crazy time. But I think I
Yeah.
don't know about you, but one of the things the last 2 years has taught me a little bit is to be grateful for what we have, and it's a
Yeah.
great time to be grateful. You've got a new record coming out. You've
Yeah.
got amazing people in your band. I mean, you've got
Yeah.
connections to Steve Earles' band, the DBs, Sunvolt,
Yeah.
Springsteen. I mean, and then Don Dixon and Mitch Easter. Wow, that's really impressive.
Those guys are incredibly awesome. It
Yeah.
was amazing working with them. So no, I do. I feel very grateful and very, very lucky.
Very cool. And, I think you kind of answered one of my questions. One of my questions was going to be, why so long between records? Perfect City came out in 2001, but I guess I know you're busy as a professor, but I'm guessing being a mom was,
It's the baby. It
yeah.
really is. I didn't want to be the kind of mom who left.
Mhm.
I wanted to be here, and I was just so excited. I had my child sort of late in life, and so I was so grateful to have her, and I loved her so much. Yeah, I had no desire to leave. So I did things here and there locally, but some wise friend said, you can't actually do everything. You maybe can do everything, but not all at once.
Yeah.
So I couldn't be on tour, and so the musical things that I did were smaller and local, and so yeah, so it was definitely very good timing. She
Yeah.
got to be a teenager. She's driving now. She's
Wow.
just like, yeah, get out.
Yeah. I know that feeling.
Go on tour. Yeah.
I have a 22-year-old who just graduated college, and another one who will be a teenager before you know it, and it happens so quickly. Well, that's really cool. I admire that because I think we've had a lot of too many examples of people who tried to do it all at the same time and their families suffered. And I was looking kind of the other day at some of the people who I admire in the music business,
Yeah.
and it seems like almost all of them, not only are they making music that I love, but they're really nice people, and they're good. They're good to their spouses and family,
Yeah.
and we can do it all in a way. That's right.
In that way. Yeah. Yeah. And they also don't drink and do drugs. That's the
Hmm.
other misconception about people who play music. It's that
Right.
I think if you do that too much, you die.
Yeah,
So
that's right. That's right.
you have to approach it in a sane way.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned you're a professor, and you're also an author.
Oh, you got novel sounds.
I
Thank you.
Fascinating book. And of course you have
Thank you.
I mentioned the fact that I wanted to ask you about this. One of my
Yes.
obsessions is Dylan. And so I always ask
Yes.
my guests about Dylan. I definitely want to talk about
Great.
Dylan with you because you've written quite a bit
Right.
about him. Before we get to that, let me just ask you, how do you describe yourself typically? Let's say you're sitting on an airplane and someone has no clue. Well, who are you? Basically, how do
Yeah.
you describe yourself to people?
I say I'm a songwriter and a literary scholar.
Hmm.
Yeah. And that my literary scholarship focuses on popular music. It's really been such a great thing, actually. Very lucky too to be here at UNC Chapel Hill. There's a guy in my department named Bland Simpson, who has a band called the Red Clay Ramblers, who've been around playing at the Cat's Cradle since its
Sure.
first years here. So we have a beautiful creative writing faculty in my department, and Daniel Wallace, who wrote Big Fish, is also a colleague. He's going to do a flash fiction reading at my record release party with
Cool.
Django Haskins from Old Ceremony doing some kind of crazy thing on the guitar behind him. We'll see what that's all about. But
on.
anyway, Bland has a music track. He had set up a music track in the creative writing program and asked me to do it, to do a songwriting class. So in that sense, I've been just crazy lucky to be able to bring that piece of what I do into the classroom too. And so somehow it all just sort of came together over the last 5 or 7 years. I started studying ballads. It really, actually, Steve Earle told me about this. I was visiting Will on tour. Leadbelly biography, and I was reading it while I was writing a book on Southern fiction, and was like, eyeballs pop out of my head when I saw that John Lomax had brought Leadbelly to the largest conference for literature professors in the world, the MLA, in 1934. Yeah. And of course, Leadbelly was staying in a black hotel. Everything was completely racially segregated. But he was exhibit A of living literature on a panel called Popular Literature. I did all this research on it then because I became obsessed. There were no photographs. I looked, believe me, and I talked to like some really serious Leadbelly fanatics who had all kinds of arcane knowledge about Leadbelly. Nobody had photographs. So anyway, so that kind of made me think, you know, about, it just made me look into the relationship between literature and vernacular ballads. And it turns out there's a long and very rich history. So that's how the book kind of, it evolved from just a book on Southern fiction, which was interesting enough, but now to this thing about the birth of rock and roll. So it was great. And then I was rereading Peter Guralnick's work, and like Sweet Soul Music was super interesting and important for me. And but anew, in a different way now, because I'm like, oh God, this is how it all fits together. And so then, of course, I started listening to, modern sounds in country music and early Ray Charles and Otis Redding, and, trying to understand how it fits all together. You can't help but get distracted and listen to the music. And so I think I actually sort of went through the history of rock and roll, like way back into the ballads, and then through the 30s and into the 50s, and then early Dylan. And in understanding it and listening, kind of got pulled back into songwriting. So I just was really, it was great. It's just been great. Yeah, and then I have another book coming out, actually, because I did a conference on novel sounds that you have there, called Novel Sounds, at this really wonderful place near here called the National Humanities Center. It's a great guy who runs it. And they were very interested in these questions, how does high literature and vernacular music come together? So I put on a conference there. Richard Thompson came, Steve Earles came, Peter Guralnick, all these authors and everything. So now there's a book coming out called The Ink and the Grooves. It comes out in October, Conversations on Lit and Rock. And Richard Thompson has a piece in there. I interviewed Steve for it, Lucinda Williams. Laura Cantrell has a really amazing piece in it called Two Blue Suedes, about drinking in a bar in Memphis. Anyway, so the tour that I'm doing in fall is, I think, going to be called the Ink and the Grooves tour, because I'm going to do some talks and some musical performances. So I'm going on tour, but I'm also going to stop and, like, I have a talk at the Bob Dylan Institute lined up for early September, or no, mid-September, I think. So anyway, so yeah, it's been a blast.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's really cool.
Thank you.
I think it'll make you happy to hear that in 1970, it was either 5 or 6. I was at what was then called North Texas State University. I was an English major. I had a course, a junior level course called Lyrics and Poetry of Bob Dylan.
Oh, wow.
Going back as far as, it was 70, maybe it was 77, but it was no later than that.
Cool. I'm not surprised.
And then fast forward, and he's winning the Nobel. And I love your discussion of that in here. I would imagine you probably have some colleagues in the English department who bristled a little bit about him winning that Nobel. Yes?
No, because I teach in a cool department, so I don't. I mean, I think maybe I do, and they're secretly bristling. But no. I mean, I think that mainly it's not that new. Is that you read it? What I had to say there, like, your class in the 70s is preceded by a class at Vanderbilt in the late 1950s, taught by this guy named Donald Davidson, who was a poet and a segregationist his whole life. Actually, most of those guys recanted. He did not. And I went and did research in the library, in the archives at Vanderbilt, and found his ballad class notes, and turns out, like I say in the book, that Harvard. I mean, the Francis James, John Lomax was at Harvard for a year. Francis James Child, those child ballads were collected by a Chaucerian,
Wow.
So there's an overlap that just goes back forever. So it's funny. I ran into a medievalist in the hall when I was writing, an old man, an old white man. And I was like, ballads. And he's just like, well, I mean, the Canterbury Tales are based on ballads.
That's true.
Duh.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
Okay. So I think you're popping a balloon here for me. I've been saying for a long time, and I still think it's true to some extent, but I'd love to hear how you might comment on this. I've been saying for a long time that no one is more responsible than Dylan for sort of making rock music literature,
Yeah, you're in very good company.
Yeah, and have you listened to Steve's Audible exclusive on The Moment in 1965?
No, but I've had this conversation with Steve Earle a million times, and he and Peter Gralnick had a kind of back and forth about it that was really productive and interesting at the second one of these novel sound symposiums down here.
Yeah.
And Gralnick was saying, no, I mean, Chuck Berry is a poet just as much as Bob Dylan, and Steve was saying that's when it stopped being about cars and girls, and started being about something else. So
yeah.
So I mean, one thing you can say about Dylan that changed things, I mean, so many things obviously, but is that first record included ballads again. He returned to those ballads. And when they emerged and when they were collected, those, Pretty Peggy-O or some Blind Lemon Jefferson song, when they were first recorded, they were recorded as hillbilly music or race records. So they were recorded as kind of essentializing the racial identity of the singer. But Dylan kind of was like, whatever. It's the kind of racial mixture of the age of rock and roll sort of made his presentation of those songs kind of more, it just changed the meaning of them. Yeah. But so that's not about literature per se, I guess. I mean, so I'm sort of avoiding the question.
Well, and then you fast forward to after he kind of got steeped in Verlaine and Rimbaud and the French surrealists, and that's, I think, when for me, I always go back to that moment, and I've probably mentioned this 10 times on this podcast before. That moment when Brian Wilson listened to Dylan and said, "Oh, we can do that," and John Lennon did the same thing, right? And so yeah, Dylan wasn't in a vacuum. He didn't do it all by himself, but he's still probably the most responsible person for this.
I'm married to a Dylan fanatic. Okay, so I can't quote chapter and verse like he does, but I've heard I understand the import and I understand the reverence. I do.
Yeah, right on. Well, let's see. Let me back up a little bit. The point of this is not to do a long biography or something, but let's talk a little bio. I know you were born in Nashville. Is that right?
Yeah.
How interesting that you were born in Nashville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have a song on the record actually that when the whole record comes out, I think will be a focus track called Rebel Debutante, about my mother actually. It was, there's a line in the song, ERA and Dylan on the radio, kicked her husband out and now she's flat broke. Okay, then later in the verse, it's a story song. It's she and Graham were extras in the Altman film. So it's about my mom and her brother Graham and her brother Tommy and some truth to it, but they were not actually in the Altman film. But when I watch that movie, I definitely get that sense of the uncanny, because that's what it was. And that's what I guess Altman is known for, his sort of really grainy realism. And that is so what Nashville looked and felt like when I was a very small child. So yeah, 70s Nashville is my home. And yeah, my mom pulled us out of the Catholic school in 3rd grade and took us to see Johnny Cash at Opryland. Not at the Grand Ole Opry, at the cheesy Opryland. And we were like, yeah, this is much cooler than being in school.
So what were you like as a kid? Was it something that you knew as a kid, you were going to be writing and playing music?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We had a tenant in our house. My parents were divorced, and so to make ends meet, my mom had a friend of hers living in the house. There was like a third floor that she rented out, I guess, and she played guitar. And I was obsessed with this woman. I thought she was so cool. Like, she had long Crystal Gale like hair. And so she taught me how to play, and I learned how to play and got a guitar. I had a book. I don't know where the book came from, but I had I learned, I remember the first song I learned to play was Freight Train by Libba Cotton. So, yeah, and I write about it in the intro to the book that's coming out in October, The Ink and the Grooves, about just being that age and, chaotic household, violence, divorce, crazy, drunken, whatever. And it's the 70s. I mean, there's like naked parties and adults smoking pot. Actually, I was really good friends at the time with Kelly Looney, who sadly died. He was Steve's bass player for many years. And when I started going out with Will and got to ride in the bus, it was just a time to reconnect with Kelly, who had been a childhood friend. He was older than me, but our mothers were really close, and we got to reminiscing over the years. I was like, "Do you remember that naked party at Cheekwood?" And he's like, "Yeah, I remember. I didn't go, but I do remember." So, but anyway, listening to my mother's rock and roll records. I mean, that's just part of my generation. And yes, I did. I just was mesmerized by it, and I was, obsessed with Joan Baez and Linda Ronstadt, and so yeah, I did know.
So I hear in your music, I sometimes hear Tom Petty. I sometimes hear Lucinda.
Oh, thank you for both of those.
Who else do you think are probably in there in some way or another in your DNA now?
Yeah, I think those are pretty good. I mean, I think everybody has gotten Dylan in their DNA for sure.
Yeah.
But I grew up listening to when I was very young, sort of the Beatles, the band, Joan Baez, all those big
Neil Young,
of course. And then I got into high school and was listening to the Clash, and then the Ramones and Prince, and I graduated high school in 1983. So, and then college in 87, REM came into, and the DBs and Big Star were a big part of my college experience. So I really like, I love pop music. I was never really good at sitting through industrial, non-melodic kind of prog stuff. I respect it. It has its place, but I'm a little more lowbrow.
Yeah, right on. Well, let's see. Let me look at some of the questions I have for you here. I wanted to ask you about Chapel Hill, and maybe I'll ask it this way. What do you like most, and what do you like least about living in Chapel Hill?
The only things I don't like about living in Chapel Hill are copperheads in the legislature. Every other thing is great.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I love Chapel Hill. It's academia is really like, you don't, at least in the humanities, like an English professor, you don't get to choose where you live, really.
Right.
You just get whatever job you can possibly get. They're so hard to come by, especially now. So I got shipped out to Cleveland for my first job, and I had a little postdoc in New York at NYU. So I was luckily able to be in New York for 2 years. That's when I made my first record with Eric Gamble.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave up on, people had their dream job, like a dream academic job. And I gave up on that concept. You know, it's like, there's no fucking dream. I don't know. And then Will, my husband is of course from North Carolina. The DBs are all from, and Let's Active and Mitch and stuff are from Winston-Salem, which is about an hour and a half from here.
Mhm.
And I got a fellowship at that National Humanities Center place down here. I was like, okay, great. We get to go be down there for a year, hang out with the other DBs. Although I don't think Peter was living here again yet. And then I got hired, and it was a miracle that I got hired in the English department down here. And
Now you have your dream job.
and now I know that there is such a thing as a dream job, and that it's here.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the legislature is a pretty big bummer because it's a state school, and so my bosses are appointed by people on the Tea Party side of things. Hope
Yeah.
I don't get fired.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you know this about me, but I actually just retired after teaching for 25 years at
Wow, congrats.
Texas
Where did you-
A&M University. I didn't really retire. My wife likes to, when someone says, "Oh, how's retirement?" She'll jump right in and say, "He's not retired. I'm not sitting around, doing nothing. I'm keeping really busy." And the funny thing is, the university still keeps having me back, but as an
Great.
adjunct to do stuff. But life is good. Life is good. But I know
What do
a
you
little bit
teach?
about what's that.
What do you teach?
Well, I started in English, but
Oh my gosh, I had no idea.
but I have the very strange background of business and humanities, and so I ended up teaching business communications in the MBA programs in the business school here.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a great gig, and
Yeah.
I know a little bit about straddling those worlds of playing music and being in academia.
Yeah, it sounds like you're one of us, man.
Yeah, right on. Okay, most memorable show you've ever played?
Well, I have two answers to that question. One is I was playing with this guy who was my boyfriend in Boston in the 80s named Joe Harbord. He was one of the people that co-founded Fort Apache Studios. And I was teaching in a Catholic school, 8th grade at the time. And the nuns came to the show, which I hadn't expected. And I was doing, we were Joe and Flo, and I was doing Iggy Pop's song, Cock in My Pocket. And so they were there, and I was like, fuck, I can't do this. And Joe just ripped into it, and he's just like, ladies, gentlemen, sisters. And so that was, and they kept seeing me in the hall the next day and going like, I was like,
That's
oh my
amazing.
God. So that was really
Wow.
amazing. That was memorable in the sheer terror that it imprinted on my, adrenaline system. And then another was, I went with my first record to Utrecht to this festival there called the Blue Highways Festival. And they were kind enough, because I didn't have time to rehearse my band or whatever. We were far flung, like New York and Nashville and whatever. And they allowed us to do the opening night party at a bar, Cafe de Stade. I still have a t-shirt. And we got there and it, fell asleep, jet lag, and barely was awake to go do this show. And Chip Taylor and Girk Morlix were in the audience. And I was like, oh my God. They were so great. They were really sweet and very supportive. And it was just really, it was also, going to Europe is always a revelation for an Americana artist, because everybody knows your songs. So yeah, I had people singing along in the audience, and it was pretty wonderful.
Yeah, that's cool. Most memorable show you have attended, and you can go all the way back to when you were a kid, that Johnny Cash show, if that's the one.
No, it was when this was when it became about rock and roll and not just singer-songwriter. I saw the Fleshtones. I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and we had a cafeteria with a stairway that came down like a spiral staircase, almost spiral, just curved down. and they had gigs there on the weekend, and or I don't know how often, but the Fleshtones were playing. I saw Throwing Muses there. I saw great shows there, actually. But the Fleshtones, the band came in uh, in a single file kind of line, and the last person in the line was the drummer, and he was beating on a garbage can, a big plastic garbage can, and just unbelievable entrance, you know, down the stairs with the beating on the drum, and then his kind of seamless switching over to his actual drum. I can't remember if I guess some members of the band were on the stage well before him and playing, they're kind of revving it up with the bass and guitar. But when he got to the stage and then they just kind of all came in, I was just like, yeah, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
must be a part of that.
Yeah.
It was really great.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because I know most people who perform music, they have those moments where, even though you said you knew as a kid, but still, when you have those moments at a show and you go, I must do that.
I have to.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's
Yeah.
so just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Who would you like to be share a bill with that you've never played with?
It's a great question. Yeah, so many bands, I guess. Daniel Romano. I got to be on a bill with Steve Earle back in October. He had me open up for him in Wisconsin, so that was amazing. I'd love to do it again. His crowd is so wonderful. They love him.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just really, they're forgiving, and there's a lot of great energy coming from the audience. I had hoped one day to open for John Prine. I'm friends with the guys in his band, so that's a heartbreak. You know, I mean, Richard Thompson, Lucinda Williams, Emmylou Harris. I don't know. Any rock band with a great, exciting crowd. I'm not very picky. well, I am picky, actually, but there's good audiences for you and bad audiences for you, you know, like appropriate billing.
Well, when Highways and Rocketships really takes off, you might end up on some of those stages with some of those bands. You never know. Certainly could happen. So if Bob Dylan showed up at your door today, knocked on your door and said, hey, I hear you're a songwriter, play me one of your songs, what would you play for him?
Great question. I believe that I would play Wi-Fi Heart.
And why would you play that one?
I love it. You know, I mean, I don't know if you're a songwriter, right? Like some of your songs, I mean, you have to love them.
Yes.
You have to love them or you won't finish them and want to play them. But that one I really love. I just really love it. The chord changes are weird. I really studied somebody else's, like Daniel Romano song, you know, listening to these interesting changes. And so I love the changes, and I feel like I owe him, Daniel Romano, like so much from listening and learning from him. But I like the way the words ended up. Nice.
Yeah, good answer. Yeah. Several of the people I've talked to, their answers to that question were basically, for example, Tim Easton said, he mentioned one. I
love Tim Easton.
Yeah, he was great. He mentioned one of his newest songs. He said, man, I got to pick something that I'm playing a lot and I know well, because I'd be nervous, and I don't, you know, I want to make sure I know it. And it's a brand new song of mine, and I would play that one, and that's why. But yeah, he could play a lot of his songs for Bob for sure.
Oh God, yeah.
So as an English professor, this list is probably way too long to convey right now to us. But I mention a few books that have been influential on you.
Sound and Fury by William Faulkner. Influential on my songwriting, or just that I love?
Yeah, just any way you want to take that.
Flannery O'Connor's short story, A Good Man Is Hard to Find, which is based on a song that hit by Bessie Smith. I love very much the fiction of Lori Moore. I got to meet her this semester. She came up here and did a talk and came to my class and stuff. Her novel, A Gate at the Stairs, I think is really unbelievable, as are her short stories. Yeah, Sound of Fury. Yeah, I don't know.
How about Kerouac?
I don't. I feel like it's a boy book.
Yeah, I can see that. It's
I think
also
it's
one of those books. It's one of those books though that
Yeah.
people, I think, misunderstand a lot. They either haven't read it or they read it with so many preconceived notions that they had him confused with Neil Cassidy when they read the book. But
No, it's smart. It's really smart. I feel like it's a little sort of, I can't get in, or like when I read it last, I couldn't get into the beat kind of spiritual early hipster thing. It's not, can't relate to it. I would take Pynchon's Crying of Lot 49 over on the road any day.
Yeah.
But I do recognize its brilliance and its place. And the road novel is so key. I mean, Lolita, like, in some ways, As I Lay Dying, it's such a key trope. And he made it kind of rock and roll and contemporary. So I respect it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's something kind of like Updike about it for me, where it's like, I get it, but I wouldn't want to hang out with that guy.
Yeah, I hear you. Who's someone that you're maybe reading now that a lot of people might not know yet that you could turn us on to?
Well, Lori Moore, but I think a lot of people probably know her work. I mean, Sally Rooney, I don't know what your people are into, but she's great. Here's a book that I think is really fucking incredible, is Anna Burns' Milkman.
Okay.
She's Irish. It's from 2018. It's totally weird, and I just think it is so smart.
Okay, right on.
That's my current favorite.
Have you read Rick Bass?
Oh, yes. I like Rick Bass very much. I'm actually reading, I believe it's him. There's a guitar maker in Vermont named Creston Lee that I know about him because a lot of people I know have guitars made by him. And we got in touch with each other because he's like you. He's literary and rock dude. And he sent me his novel. And Rick Bass is one of the reviewers, I believe, for it. Anyway, so that's somebody I recommend highly, is Creston Lee.
Okay.
He's really good. He's got one book. I'm reading that. The other novel that's sort of random that I'll recommend is, I mean, maybe that's what I'm going to do now, is just go on tour and meet musicians who've written novels and read those and recommend those.
Yeah.
But Danny Bland, this guy, Danny Bland, is he was Steve's tour manager when I opened for him. And he's, I think, usually the tour manager for Dave Alvin for years. And we just saw him this weekend. He was doing the tour managing for the Afghan Wigs. Anyway, he told me he wrote a novel when I opened for Steve, and I read it, and it's totally great. In Case We Die is what it's called.
Okay.
I love it.
Okay.
I think he's continuing to write too.
Let me.
So there might be more from him.
Let me, along the same lines. Are you familiar with Will Johnson, Centromatic? Will's kind of a Texas hero in the kind of the indie music scene. I mean, he's. Let me just say this: Patterson Hood, for example, called Centromatic his favorite live band in the world, and there have been a lot of connections. But he just put out his first novel called If or When I Call. Will Johnson. Okay. I recommend it, and it fits in that category of musicians
I'll
who are
grab
writing books. Okay, great. A couple more questions, and I'm going to let you go. What pisses you off?
So many things, John. So many things piss me off, and I try to just keep that in check. What pisses me off? I don't know, lying and cheating. I don't know. I'm not in a very angry mood today, but
Good.
I just see like I think, people mistreating one another,
Yeah.
um, the stupidity of extremism. I guess one thing that really bums me out slash pisses me off right now is this tendency to make statements and arguments like Marjorie Taylor Greene or something without any accountability to evidence or facts or giving a shit if you're um you know making it up or if it's even true what you're saying. It's just this kind of current um uh lack of uh a kind of integrity
Hmm.
in argument. I can't believe it. It makes me so sad. I mean, as a teacher, right, you spend your life trying to help people say what they mean and be accountable to it. And so just to see people who are now in positions of power who aren't playing by that most basic ethical rule in argumentation, that really, I have a hard time even reading about it.
Yeah.
I have to make the drip kind of slow so that I don't become overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm there with you.
Yeah.
My follow-up question is, do you have any particular practice, meditation, or any other kind of practice to help you deal with the shit that we have to deal with?
Yeah. I have so many things. In my self-help grab bag, meditation is definitely in there. I seek to be a daily meditator. I do not succeed most of the time, but I do have it on my list. I think, I don't really drink alcohol. That really helps me. And yeah, like maybe this is wrapped up with the exercise,
Hmm.
getting some cardio and eating healthy food and stuff. But
Yeah.
I think like maybe the boiling it down, it would be, and maybe that's why I couldn't answer the anger question so quickly. It's just resisting, taking a minute
Yeah.
always.
Good. Great.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. A couple of heavy questions to finish off.
can do.
Do you have any? I guess this question comes. I ask all my guests this question. I think some of them
Yeah,
wonder why in the heck I'm asking a question. I just turned 66, and while in today's world that's still relatively young, I'm pretty
yeah,
healthy. You can't
yay,
help it. You start seeing your own mortality in a way that you never have before. So
yeah,
these questions come up. I'm just
yeah,
curious. Do you have
yeah.
any concept what happens when we die?
I like your question, and actually, my record certainly has to do with those sorts of um, feeling yourself.
Mhm.
My song about my mom and her aging, and it's a song, my single that's already out, "Sweet to Me," is told from the point of view of my grandmother. So after she passed, and that one was very hard for me to sing without crying at a
Yeah,
certain line at the very end. So, so, so yeah, here's the thing. I don't know.
sure.
I hope that there is something.
Mhm.
I believe in kind of, the spiritual realm. You can tell as a teacher or a songwriter the gigantic difference between not being in a room and then going back into the classroom. I went with my N95. I did not stay home this year this spring, because my students obviously needed it. And yeah, it's a totally different thing to be there in person. What is that?
Mhm.
You know, is
Yeah.
it molecules? I do have a song. I haven't recorded it. Spirits, Ghosts, and Molecules. After my dad died, he came here, and Will and I looked after him until he passed. And just going into his apartment and kind of smelling still his old man smell and seeing the coffee stain on the rug. And so I wrote this song, Spirits, Ghosts, and Molecules, like he was still there. And it was only for a while, after he died, because those molecules go away. But so I don't know.
Yeah. Are you okay with not knowing is kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. My dad was a theist. He like wrote books proving the existence of God. And I think that somehow a reaction again, he was, raised a Catholic, and I feel comforted by the world, whatever, something. I feel hope, and but I'm good with not comprehending what's past that. I don't know. It's hard to think about what it will be like, and we all experience it at our age. I'm a little younger than you are for sure, but when you have parents who die, you think about what it will be like to be in that moment and contemplate death. And I hope I can do it gracefully. I feel like my job from here on out is going to be just acceptance. It is a bummer that it ends.
Yeah.
It's really nice. I really like it here.
Me too. And I think that the thing, I'm okay with not knowing as well. I think a lot of people struggle with that, but I'm okay with not knowing. And what it creates in me is gratitude for this moment right here, what we have. This leads into my last question, Florence, which is when you are dead and gone, what do you hope people say about you?
Good question. That she made the world better when she was in it, in all kinds of ways, and that she did the right thing. Right
on. Hey, speaking of gratitude, I really have a lot of gratitude to you right now for spending this hour with me. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing how this new record takes off for you. Wishing you all the best for that. It's so cool that you took a 20-year hiatus and now you're back in it, and it's cool to watch, and best of luck to you, and thank you so much.
John, thank you so much. I really appreciate your having me. It's been really wonderful to talk to you, and I love that you're doing this podcast, and I hope everybody knows that it's time to connect.
Right on. Thank you. We'll see you down the road. Bye-bye.
Okay.